The email arrived at 7:42 a.m., 3 minutes before my 60th birthday officially began. Not at 8 o'clock when the workday started, not at 9 o'clock when meetings commenced, but in that gray space between sleep and coffee, when most people check their phones out of habit rather than necessity. Subject: Workforce optimization, immediate action required. I stared at the screen of my iPhone, the blue light reflecting off my reading glasses in the dim kitchen. 23 years at Meridian Holdings. 2 decades of building their pharmaceutical licensing division from a 3-person startup acquisition into a $4.8 billion revenue stream. And they chose my birthday to deliver the blade. The message was sterile, corporate speak wrapped around a simple truth: they were letting me go. Restructuring for operational efficiency, they called it. The signature line read, Bradley Hoffman, VP Strategic Transitions. I'd never heard of Bradley Hoffman. I set the phone down next to my untouched coffee and walked to the window. Outside, October rain painted streaks down the glass, and I could see my reflection ghosted over the city skyline. Alina Vasquez, Senior Director of Global Licensing. Or rather, former Senior Director. The irony wasn't lost on me. Yesterday, I'd been in the final stages of closing the Northbridge deal, a $2.3 billion pharmaceutical licensing agreement with 3 European governments. The largest contract in Meridian's history. Today, I was unemployed. My phone buzzed again. A text from my daughter Carmen: Happy birthday, Mom. Can't wait to celebrate tonight. Love you. I typed back, thank you, sweetheart. Tonight will be interesting. I didn't tell her about the email. Not yet. At 8:15 a.m., I drove through Meridian's security gate for what I assumed would be the last time. My badge still worked, a small mercy, or perhaps an oversight. The parking garage felt colder than usual, the fluorescent lights casting everything in harsh relief. The elevator ride to the 14th floor was silent except for the mechanical hum. When the doors opened, I stepped into chaos masquerading as normalcy. People hurried past with coffee and urgent expressions, but something felt wrong. Conversations stopped when they saw me. Eyes darted away. They knew. My office door was propped open, and inside, a woman in a navy suit was placing items from my desk into a cardboard box. She looked up when I entered, mid-40s, sharp features, the kind of professional smile that never reached the eyes. Ms. Vasquez? I'm Priya Chen from Human Resources. We need to discuss your transition. Transition. Another euphemism for erasure. I assume you received the notification, she continued, not waiting for my response. Given the sensitive nature of your role, we'll need to complete the offboarding process this morning. I watched her place my awards into the box. The crystal globe from the International Licensing Association. The framed photo of Carmen at her medical school graduation. The small succulent plant I'd kept alive for 6 years through sheer stubbornness. The Northbridge contract, I said quietly. She paused. What about it? It's not complete. The final authorization protocols require my biometric signature. Without it, the contract isn't legally binding. Priya's smile flickered. I'm sure the team can handle the technical details. The team. I almost laughed. The team consisted of 3 junior associates and a project manager who'd been hired 8 months ago. None of them understood the architectural complexity of what we'd built. None of them knew about the fail-safes I'd embedded, the contingency protocols, the delicate web of international pharmaceutical law that held the entire structure together. I see, I said. I didn't argue. I didn't plead. I simply watched as she continued packing my life into a box barely large enough to hold a laptop. At 9:30 a.m., I was escorted to the lobby. No farewell party, no goodbye speeches, just Priya's heels clicking on marble as she walked me to the exit. At the revolving door, she handed me a folder. Final paperwork. Please review and return by end of business Friday. I took the folder but didn't open it. Instead, I looked past her, through the glass walls of the conference room on the ground floor. Inside, I could see Bradley Hoffman, young, energetic, gesturing animatedly at a projection screen. The slide read, Northbridge acquisition mission accomplished. My stomach tightened. They were already celebrating a deal that didn't exist. I sat in my car in the parking garage for 47 minutes. Not because I was devastated, I'd seen the writing on the wall for months. New leadership, cost-cutting measures, whispered conversations about legacy employees. I sat because I was thinking. The Northbridge contract wasn't just another deal. It was a masterpiece of regulatory navigation, a document that had taken 18 months to negotiate across 3 time zones and 4 legal systems. Every clause had been crafted with surgical precision, every contingency mapped and remapped. And at its heart was something Bradley Hoffman and his team couldn't possibly understand: a biometric authorization system I designed specifically to prevent unauthorized transfers. I pulled out my personal laptop, the one Meridian's IT department had never touched, and connected to the secure portal I'd maintained for years. Not for espionage, not for sabotage, but for exactly this moment. When you build something complex enough to control billions of dollars, you don't walk away without insurance. The contract status page loaded slowly. Northbridge Pharma Licensing Agreement, status, pending final authorization, primary signatory, E. Vasquez, biometric lock, active. I leaned back in the driver's seat. They could celebrate all they wanted, but the contract existed in a kind of digital purgatory. Without my authorization, it was just expensive paperwork. My phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I hadn't seen in 5 years, Viktor Petrov. I answered on the 3rd ring. Alina. His voice carried the faint trace of a Russian accent, refined by decades in American boardrooms. I heard the news. Viktor Petrov, CEO of Genesis Biosolutions, Meridian's most sophisticated competitor, and my former colleague from our days at the FDA. We'd maintained a professional relationship built on mutual respect and strategic distance. News travels fast, I said. In our industry, it travels at the speed of stock prices. Meridian's board announcement hit the wire 20 minutes ago. They're calling it a leadership refresh. I closed my eyes. Of course they'd spun it. Victor, I assume this isn't a condolence call. No, it's not. He paused. The Northbridge contract. It's still yours, isn't it? I smiled for the first time that morning. Victor understood the architecture of power in ways that Bradley Hoffman never would. It might be, I said carefully. I'm at the Carlton Hotel, Presidential Suite. How quickly can you get here? The Carlton's presidential suite overlooked the city like a glass-walled observatory. Victor stood at the window, still tall and imposing at 68, his silver hair catching the afternoon light. He'd aged well, I thought, the kind of aging that suggested wisdom rather than decline. 23 years, he said without turning around. They threw away 23 years of institutional knowledge for what? Quarterly cost savings. The math was probably attractive, I replied, settling into a leather chair. Senior director salary versus 3 junior associates. Easy decision for someone looking at spreadsheets. He turned, and I saw something in his expression I'd rarely seen from Victor: anger. The Northbridge deal. Walk me through the lock mechanism. I'd expected this question. Victor was nothing if not thorough. Biometric authorization tied to the primary negotiator, me. The European regulatory framework requires personal accountability for pharmaceutical licensing. Without my signature, the contract reverts to pending status. After 72 hours, it becomes void. And then. Standard procedure. The European authority opens the bidding to qualified alternatives. Victor moved to his desk and pulled up something on his tablet. Genesis has been pre-qualified for Northbridge since the beginning. We were the second choice. Of course they were. Victor was always 3 moves ahead. The question, he continued, is whether you're interested in ensuring the contract reaches the right hands. I studied his face. What are you offering? Executive Vice President of Global Strategy. Full executive compensation package. And. He paused, watching me carefully. Your name on the contract. Not buried in the fine print, not hidden in metadata. Your name, your signature, your legacy. The offer hung in the air between us. It wasn't just a job, it was validation. Recognition. Everything Meridian had stripped away in a single email. There's more, Victor said. The board has been discussing succession planning. I'm 68, Alina. I won't be doing this forever. The implication was clear, though unspoken. This wasn't just about the Northbridge contract. This was about the future. I thought about Bradley Hoffman in that conference room, celebrating a deal he didn't understand. I thought about Priya Chan packing my life into a cardboard box. I thought about 23 years of building something, only to watch it be handed to someone who saw it as numbers on a spreadsheet. How long do I have to decide? I asked. Victor checked his watch. The contract expires in 41 hours. But if you're going to move, it needs to be now. The European Authority requires 48 hours notice for any transition of primary authorization. 41 hours. The same amount of time Meridian had given me between firing me and expecting me to disappear quietly. I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. The Northbridge portal was still open in my browser, the biometric lock still active. Victor, I said, my finger hovering over the authorization transfer button. I want something else. His eyebrows raised slightly. When the announcement goes out, when Genesis gets the contract, I want Meridian to know exactly why they lost it. No corporate speak, no diplomatic language. I want them to understand that they didn't just fire an employee. They fired the architect of their biggest deal. Victor smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from him all afternoon. Done, he said. I pressed the button. Authorization transfer initiated. New primary signatory, Genesis Biosolutions transfer authorized by E. Vasquez status, pending European Authority approval. The screen blinked once, then updated. Somewhere in Brussels, an automated system was already processing the change. In 48 hours, the Northbridge contract would officially belong to Genesis Biosolutions. But first, there would be chaos. My phone started ringing at 3:47 p.m., just as Victor and I were finalizing the employment agreement. The caller ID showed Meridian's main number. I let it go to voicemail. Then it rang again. And again. Victor gestured toward the phone. You might want to take one of those. On the fourth call, I answered. Alina. The voice was young, panicked. This is Bradley Hoffman. We need to talk. Immediately. Mr. Hoffman, I said calmly. I'm no longer a Meridian employee. I believe HR made that quite clear this morning. There's been some kind of error with the Northbridge contract. The system is showing a status change. Not an error, I interrupted. Silence on the other end. Then, what do you mean? I mean exactly what I said. The contract authorization has been transferred to a qualified alternative vendor. Genesis Biosolutions will be taking over the Northbridge relationship. You can't do that. His voice cracked slightly. That's corporate sabotage. I almost laughed. Mr. Hoffman, I designed the authorization system specifically to prevent unauthorized transfers. The contract was never yours to begin with. It was mine. And as of this afternoon, I've transferred it to my new employer. You're new, he stopped. You can't be serious. Genesis Biosolutions will be issuing a press release within the hour. I suggest you prepare your own statement. I hung up. Victor was watching me with something approaching admiration. Remind me never to cross you, he said. The press release went out at 4:23 p.m. Victor had crafted it personally, and it was a masterpiece of corporate diplomacy wrapped around a nuclear bomb. Genesis Biosolutions announces acquisition of Northbridge Pharmaceutical Licensing Agreement. Boston, Massachusetts, Genesis Biosolutions today announced the successful acquisition of the Northbridge Pharmaceutical Licensing Agreement, a $2.3 billion contract with European health authorities. The transfer was facilitated by the original architect of the agreement, industry veteran Alina Vasquez, who joins Genesis as Executive Vice President of Global Strategy. We're honored to welcome Alina to the Genesis family, said CEO Victor Petrov. Her expertise and relationships in international pharmaceutical licensing are unparalleled. The Northbridge contract represents not just a business opportunity, but a validation of the kind of institutional knowledge that drives true innovation. The agreement, originally negotiated by Ms. Vasquez during her tenure at Meridian Holdings, includes comprehensive licensing arrangements for 3 breakthrough therapeutic compounds across European markets. By 5 p.m., Meridian's stock had dropped 12%. By market close, it was down 18%, $847 million in market capitalization gone. The next morning, I woke up to 73 missed calls and 312 unread emails. My phone had been buzzing all night like an angry wasp trapped in a jar. I made coffee, real coffee, not the office swill I'd been drinking for 2 decades, and sat at my kitchen table, scrolling through the digital carnage. The headlines were brutal. Meridian hemorrhages nearly $1 billion after botched executive firing. Pharma giant loses landmark deal hours after letting go key architect. The $2.3 billion mistake, how Meridian's cost-cutting backfired spectacularly. But it was the internal emails that told the real story. Someone, probably a sympathetic colleague, had forwarded me the executive communications thread for Meridian's crisis management meeting. From bradley.hoffman@meridian.com to Executive Leadership Team Subject, Urgent Northbridge Situation. Team. We have a significant problem. The Northbridge contract has been transferred to Genesis Biosolutions without authorization. Legal is reviewing our options, but initial assessment suggests the transfer was technically valid under the contract's original terms. I need a full analysis of how this happened and what our exposure is by COB today. Bradley. From priya.chen@meridian.com to Executive Leadership Team Subject, Urgent Northbridge Situation. Bradley. After reviewing the employment termination file, it appears Ms. Vasquez maintained legal authority over the contract through biometric authorization protocols embedded in the original agreement. The contract architecture required her personal signature for any transfers or modifications. The termination package did not include any provisions for contract reassignment because HR was not aware of the biometric lock mechanism. Priya. I smiled, sipping my coffee. They still didn't understand. Even now, even with their lawyers and consultants and crisis managers, they were thinking about it as a technical problem rather than a human one. My phone rang. Carmen. Mom. Her voice was tight with worry. I just saw the news. Are you okay? I leaned back in my chair, looking out at the morning sun streaming through my windows. I'm better than okay, sweetheart. I'm finally exactly where I'm supposed to be. The news is saying you cost Meridian almost $1 billion. The news is saying I transferred a contract I created to a company that values the work I do. A pause. Then, Mom, you're kind of a badass. I laughed, really laughed, for the first time in months. Language, Carmen. But, thank you. At 10 a.m., I drove to Genesis Biosolutions for my first day as Executive Vice President of Global Strategy. The building was smaller than Meridian's glass tower, but it felt different. Purposeful. Alive. Victor met me in the lobby personally, a gesture that would have been unthinkable at Meridian, where executives moved in carefully choreographed hierarchies. How does it feel to be the most expensive hire in pharmaceutical history? He asked as we rode the elevator to the executive floor. Expensive. The stock analysts are calling you the $2.3 billion woman. They're saying Genesis effectively paid nearly $1 billion in lost Meridian market cap to acquire your services. I considered this. I prefer to think of it as Meridian paying $847 million to learn the importance of institutional knowledge. The elevator opened onto a floor that hummed with energy. People moved with purpose, conversations buzzed with excitement, and I could feel something I hadn't experienced in years: momentum. Victor walked me to my new office, corner suite, windows on 2 sides, and a view that stretched across the city to where Meridian's tower stood like a monument to short-sighted thinking. On my desk was a small gift box. Inside, a business card holder engraved with words that made my throat tight. The most valuable resource in any organization is the wisdom that walks through the door each morning. Victor Petrov. 6 months later, I stood in the same Carlton Hotel suite where Victor had made his offer. But this time, I wasn't there as a visitor. I was there as the newly announced CEO of Genesis Biosolutions. Victor's retirement announcement had come 3 weeks earlier, not due to pressure or health concerns, but because he'd accomplished what he'd set out to do. The Northbridge deal had been executed flawlessly, generating $400 million in first-quarter revenue. Genesis's stock had climbed 43%. And I had proven something that both of us already knew: experience isn't dead weight. It's the foundation everything else is built on. The transition ceremony was small, elegant, 20 board members, key executives, and a few journalists who understood that they were witnessing something significant. Leadership, Victor said in his brief remarks, isn't about age or energy or the latest buzzwords. It's about wisdom, judgment, and the courage to make decisions that matter for the long term. Alina Vasquez embodies all of these qualities, and I can think of no one better suited to guide Genesis into its next chapter. When I took the podium, I looked out at faces that reflected respect rather than resignation, energy rather than calculation. In the back of the room, I spotted Carmen, who had driven up from medical school for the ceremony. She was beaming. When I was 60 years old, I began, someone decided I was too expensive to keep around. They thought my experience was a liability, my knowledge was outdated, my perspective was unnecessary. I paused, letting the words settle. They were wrong about all of it. But they were especially wrong about this. They thought getting older meant being finished. What they didn't understand is that at 60, I wasn't at the end of my career. I was at the beginning of my most important work. I gestured toward the Genesis logo behind me. This company represents something powerful, the belief that wisdom matters, that experience has value, that the most innovative thinking often comes from those who've seen enough failures to know what success actually looks like. The applause was warm, sustained. But what moved me most was what I saw in the faces looking back at me, recognition. Not just of achievement, but of possibility. After the ceremony, as the crowd mingled over champagne and congratulations, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Ms. Vasquez, I'm 58 and was just let go by my company after 19 years. I saw your story in the news. Is there hope for people like us? I typed back, there's always hope. There's always another chapter. The question is whether you're brave enough to write it. Carmen found me by the windows, looking out at the city lights beginning to twinkle in the evening dusk. So what's next, Mom? You've got the CEO job, the successful company, the revenge story that made international news. What's left? I smiled, thinking about the text message, about all the Alinas out there who'd been written off too early, dismissed too quickly. What's next is building something that lasts. Not just a successful company, but a different way of thinking about value, about experience, about what it means to contribute. What's next is proving that the best ideas don't always come from the youngest voices in the room. I turned to face my daughter, this brilliant young woman who represented everything I hoped the future could be. What's next is showing the world that at 60, I'm not finished. I'm just getting started. Outside, the city hummed with possibility, and I felt something I hadn't experienced in decades, the certainty that the best part of my story was still being written. The Genesis Biosolutions Legacy Builder program launched 3 months later, offering career transition support and funding for experienced professionals starting new ventures. To date, it has supported over 200 entrepreneurs, with participants ranging in age from 45 to 74. The program's motto, "Experience isn't dead weight. It's rocket fuel." Meridian Holdings never recovered the Northbridge contract. Bradley Hoffman left the company 6 months after the crisis, taking a position at a startup that folded within the year. The company was acquired by a private equity firm 18 months later. Alina Vasquez remains CEO of Genesis Biosolutions, which has grown to become the third largest pharmaceutical licensing firm in North America. She turns 65 next month and shows no signs of slowing down.